Jesus reveals how to overcome the fear of failing again. Have you ever been so afraid of making mistakes again that you didn't even try? Have you ever felt paralyzed as if past failure has destroyed your courage forever? Have you ever heard voices inside you saying, "It will happen again. You will fail. You will never be good enough"? If this speaks to you, then stop everything now, because what you are about to hear is no longer an ordinary video. It is a direct call to your spirit. Because Jesus reveals to you today a hidden truth, buried for centuries, that has the power to break the chains that prevent you from moving forward. This is not just content, it is a divine summons, and you are not here by chance. Imagine a heart that beats fast before a decision, trembling hands holding a dream, afraid to try again, teary eyes looking back and wondering, "Do I still have a chance?" I know it hurts. I know that you blame yourself, that you charge yourself, that you have even thought that God might not trust you anymore. But let me tell you something with all the spiritual authority I carry now. What Jesus has to reveal to you today will completely change your perspective on failure, on starting over, on you. You will discover that the fear holding you back is not the end. It is the door to the greatest revelation of your life. This truth has been hidden for a long time. Few saw it, but now it's your turn. And if you listen to the end, you will understand why precisely your failures can be used by God as a platform for your calling. Don't leave this video. Something supernatural will happen. Close your eyes for a second. Take a deep breath and prepare yourself. Because Jesus reveals to you how to win, even when everything says you will fail again, and what he will show you, no one has ever told you before. Take a deep breath and open your heart to this message. It's no coincidence that you're here now. You were drawn to this video because Jesus reveals to you something that your soul has been crying out for. In silence, you feel. Deep down, you know that this word came from heaven for your most fragile moment. Maybe you thought about giving up. Maybe you're tired of starting over, afraid of falling again. But let me tell you something with all the faith and truth of the Spirit. This could be the revelation that changes everything. You are on holy ground. This video is not entertainment. It is an encounter with the God who does not give up on you. While many look at their failure and turn away, Jesus looks at you with eyes of restoration. He not only knows your pain, he will use it. So stay until the end. Jesus revealed something very important about this situation, and you need to hear it before leaving this video. There's something that's about to be revealed, and it could be exactly what you need to break the fear of failing again once and for all. If this word has already begun to touch your heart, be part of evangelization. Enjoy this video as an act of faith. When you click like, you are saying, "I believe this message needs to reach more hearts." And subscribing to the channel is more than just following content. It's deciding to walk with us on this spiritual journey where Jesus reveals answers to you in each video that no one else has given you. If this truth is moving you, comment right now. I refuse to live trapped by fear. Jesus calls me to start over. Your statement can break chains. It can inspire others not to give up. It could be the beginning of a chain release. You are not here by chance. There is something sacred happening, and you are part of it. Get ready, because what you're about to hear now could heal what you thought would never be fixed again. Have you ever felt that, even after seeking forgiveness, the shadow of your past continues to haunt you? As if, with every step toward restoration, an inner voice whispers, "You are not worthy." This is the reality for many who, like Pedro, face the fear of failing again. But what if I told you that there is a deep and liberating truth hidden in this story? A revelation that can transform your pain into purpose and your guilt into grace. Prepare yourself, because what comes next could be the key to your release. Have you ever felt that lump in your throat that won't go away? That weight in your chest that seems to say, "You're going to fail again"? How many times have you thought about trying, but the memory of your previous failure screams so loud that it paralyzes you? There is an invisible wound that many carry, the fear of repeating the same mistakes. And you know what's cruelest? It's just that deep down, you even believe that Jesus loves you, but you can't believe that he still trusts you. What if I told you that what keeps you stuck is not the failure itself, but the lie you believed after it? Prepare yourself for a profound journey, emotionally intense and spiritually liberating, where Jesus reveals to you that your mistakes have no power to bury your purpose. And before I continue, I leave you with the question that will affect you. Is the fear of failing again really a lack of faith, or is it the wound that no one sees? The cold early morning breeze cut the skin like a knife. The silence around was unbearable. Pedro, still panting, hidden among shadows and suspicions, felt the bitter taste of guilt running down his throat. In less than an hour, he had done what he swore he would never do. He denied the man who rescued him. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. And every "I don't know him" was like a nail driven into his soul. Jesus had looked at him, and in that look there was no hatred, but a love that hurt more than any condemnation. Peter ran. He cried, collapsed. How could someone who was so close fail so badly? Have you ever been to this place? Have you ever been betrayed by your own words, by your own fears, by the impulse to protect yourself when you knew you needed to be brave? Peter represents the one who loves but stumbles, who believes but wavers, who wants to please God but finds himself dominated by the instinct of self-preservation. It's about the fear that comes from one's own fall, that paralyzing fear of trying again, of serving again, of believing again, and failing again. Feed my sheep. John 21:17. These words of Jesus were not spoken to someone who was successful, faithful from beginning to end, blameless. No, they were directed precisely at the man who had publicly denied it at his most crucial moment. This verse is not just a calling, it is a healing. Jesus didn't just forgive Peter. He reinstated him, entrusted him with a mission. In other words, you made a bad mistake, but it's still me, it's still mine, and it still has purpose. Now imagine, what if Pedro had let the fear of failing again win? What if he had believed he was no longer worthy, that he had already blown his chance? The gospel would have lost one of the most powerful pillars of the early church. And you, what are you failing to live for fear of failing again? You are not alone in this pain. The fear of making mistakes again is cruel because it hides a lie, that your mistakes disqualify you forever. But Jesus reveals to you that your mistakes have no greater power than the call that he himself planted in you. He didn't choose you because you were perfect. He called you because he knew that even with failures, you would have the courage to return. Take a deep breath. Close your eyes and imagine Jesus looking into yours as he looked at Peter. No condemnation, no contempt, just love. Love that restores, love that calls, love that says, "You can still tend my sheep." If you have ever heard that inner voice saying, "You are no longer worthy," comment now, "Jesus, lift me up." And share this video with someone who also needs to remember that failure doesn't define who we are. It's the voice of Jesus that does. But what if I told you that there is a pain even deeper than the fear of error? A pain that silences you, even when Jesus has already forgiven you. Get ready, because what comes next could change everything. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed between the cobblestones. Shouts of condemnation mixed with the dry sound of stones being lifted. In the center of that crowd, she trembled. Every look at her body was a blow. Each finger pointed was a sentence. His disheveled hair hid part of his face, but nothing could hide the shame that ran like hot tears down his soul. She wasn't just any prostitute at that moment. She was a living symbol of error, of moral failure, of the end of the line for any woman who dared to cross the limits of the law. Dragged away like human trash, placed as bait for a religious trap. The adulterous woman was not just humiliated. It was transformed into a spectacle of mockery, an object at the center of a theological discussion between life and death. And there, in front of the only man capable of truly judging her fairly, she expects the worst. But Jesus reveals something scandalously opposite to you. Neither do I condemn you. Go your way and sin no more. John 8:11. This verse explodes with liberation in the hearts of those who have already been defined by a mistake. There is no condemnation. There is no sentence. There are no stones. Just an invitation for a new chance. But can we understand what this really means? This woman didn't just escape death. She was seen. And more than seen, it was validated by someone who knew everything about her and still chose not to condemn her. The shame that paralyzes is not just born from error, but from the belief that that error defines us eternally, that, once stained, we will never be cleansed. That once exposed, we will never be worthy of love again. Have you ever felt this way? As if you were in front of an invisible crowd pointing fingers, as if your flaws were written on your forehead for the whole world to see? Maybe there are no stones flying, but there are sharp words, judgmental looks, heavy silences. And the cruelest thing is when this crowd lives inside you. Internal voices that repeat, "You are dirty, you are the mistake, you are unforgivable." But Jesus reveals to you that shame is an emotional prison that he came to break. Shame is sneaky. It sets in even after forgiveness. Because while guilt says, "I did something wrong," shame says, "I am the mistake." And this lie, when accepted, stops you from moving, to dream, to pray, to connect with God and others. But Jesus, that morning, in front of the Pharisees, did more than free a woman. He confronted a system of emotional oppression that spans generations and still traps millions in invisible prisons today. He didn't just save her life. He rescued his identity. And here comes the deeper point. Do you believe more in the accusations of men than in the word of Jesus? How many today prefer to embrace shame rather than embrace forgiveness? Because shame, as painful as it is predictable. Forgiveness requires courage. Courage to believe that you still have value. Courage to get up, to leave that circle of emotional stones and walk with your head held high even when the world still murmurs behind your back. Close your eyes for a moment. Breathe. Feel the weight of Jesus' gaze. It's not a demanding look. It's a healing look. From someone who knows everything about you and still calls you to start over. Go and sin no more. It's as if he said, "You are not what they did to you, nor what you did. You are what I say you are." And now, in all sincerity, I ask you, is the shame that paralyzes you really guilt, or is it wounded pride disguised as penance? If this question confronts you, comment now. Jesus frees me from shame, but only comment if you are willing to break this emotional prison that prevents you from living, and share this video with someone who needs this release right now. But that's not all. There is a pain quieter than shame, a wound that seems healed but bleeds every time you remember who you were and what you did. And what comes next will show you how even the most serious mistake can be used by God to rewrite your destiny. The desert brutally swallowed his steps. Every grain of sand seemed to weigh tons on his shoulders. Moses, prince of the palace, was now a fugitive. From impulsive hero to feared assassin, he had taken a life. He tried to take justice into his own hands and failed. He fled not only from the Egyptian soldiers, but from himself, his past, his shame. The silence of the desert did not forgive him. It was a constant reminder of the mistake that exiled him from the mission that may never be again. He exchanged gold for dust, royal halls for caves of regret. The trauma of having failed in the past became the distorted mirror through which Moses began to see himself. A man who had a chance and destroyed it. And how many of us are exactly there, stuck in the fear of trying again because we believe that our previous failure disqualified us forever? I send you to Pharaoh, Exodus 3:10. These words sounded like thunder within the soul of a broken man. God didn't just visit Moses in the middle of the desert, he commissioned him again. And it wasn't just any mission. It was to return precisely to the place of his shame, but now as an instrument of liberation. Jesus reveals to you a truth that may shock many. God does not wait for you to be ready to use you. He calls you in the midst of the broken pieces, because it is in them that his glory shines most brightly. But do you believe that? Or do you still think that your past has enough power to nullify God's purpose? The trauma of failure is a type of grief. You don't just bury the mistake you made, but the image of who you thought you were. You feel like an imposter. With each attempt to rise, the past screams, "Who do you think you are?" And this voice echoes not only within you, but in looks, in conversations, in memories. It's as if there was an open scar, always ready to bleed again. Moses, for 40 years, lived with this echo, until a burning bush interrupted his defeated narrative with the truth that still confronts us today. God doesn't choose you because you're strong. He makes you stronger because he chose you. Have you ever wondered why God chose Moses, a fugitive, a man who failed when he tried to do right? Was God out of options? Or is there a pattern here? Jesus reveals to you that those who know the pain of failure carry a sensitivity that the proud will never have. They know what it's like to fail, and that's why they don't trust their own strength. They know grace not as a theory, but as the only hope. Now listen to this carefully. The enemy's greatest attack is not to make you make mistakes. It is to make you believe that because you made a mistake, God has abandoned you. And if this lie sets in, you stop. You give up. You shut up. And the plan that God wrote with his story begins to be shelved by fear, shame, and self-punishment. But today, the Holy Spirit is calling you back to your Egypt. Not to repeat the mistake, but to, now with him, free others. The same place that was the scene of your trauma can be the stage of your purpose. Take a deep breath. Allow yourself to feel this message. Close your eyes and imagine the burning bush before you. It's not an illusion. It is the presence of a God who calls you even when you think you are not worthy. And now I need to provoke you. Wasn't what you call failure just a misinterpreted beginning? Are you running away from a place where God actually wants to use you with power? If this word confronted you, comment now. Jesus sends me even with my past. But only comment if you have the courage to accept that God still sees you as an active part of his plan. And if you know someone who stopped because of the fear of making mistakes again, share this video as a divine breath on the ashes of that person's hope. But wait, what happens next will challenge everything you believe. What if I told you that God not only uses the unlikely, but also calls hidden cowards to be warriors of faith? The scene was not war, but fear dominated as if it were. Instead of spears, he held grapes. Instead of armor, he wore the insecurity of anonymity. Gideon, hid in a wine press, squeezing wheat in a place made for treading grapes. A symbolic gesture of someone who has already given up on being who they are. He wasn't just trying to survive. He was running from his own reflection. Every step of the Midianites in the region was a reminder of how small, insufficient, unworthy he felt. It wasn't ordinary cowardice. It was the result of years of being conditioned to believe he was less than. And this is one of the cruelest wounds of the soul, feeling like you will never be good enough. Gideon did not see a warrior in the mirror. I saw someone too common to be called, too weak to be used, too limited to be heard. But Jesus reveals to you that it is precisely in this place of emotional fragility that God whispers the real identity. The Lord is with you, mighty man. Judges 6:12. This phrase was not said to someone on a battlefield. It was dropped like a real bomb into the soul of someone who lived in hiding. And that's the beauty of the gospel. God doesn't wait for you to be strong to call you brave. It declares what you are before you see yourself that way. Gideon reacted as many of us react when we receive a bold word from God, by questioning, "How can I free Israel?" His logic screamed louder than his faith. But this is where the fear of not being good enough turns into a more sophisticated prison. You start rationalizing your failure before you even try. You convince yourself that it's not enough, and it becomes true, not because it is, but because you believe it is. Have you ever felt this way? Have you ever looked at God's promises and thought, "This can't be for me"? Maybe for someone more experienced, purer, more prepared. But Jesus reveals to you that the equation of heaven is different. God does not use the qualified. It qualifies those who dare to say yes. He uses the improbable to confuse what is strong. And more than that, He chooses the weak so that the glory is entirely His. But here's the most powerful part. The angel didn't call Gideon a recovering coward or a deconstruction fearful. He called him a brave man. And that changes everything. God does not define you by your reaction to fear, but by the identity that He gave you before the world hurt you. There is a voice inside you that repeats, "You are not enough. You will fail again. Don't try. Stay hidden." But there is an even more powerful voice saying, "I am with you," and that voice needs to be louder. Now imagine the angel of the Lord appearing before you in the middle of your routine, in your emotional hiding places, in your backstage of shame, and saying, "I see what no one sees. You are stronger than you. Think." The question is, will you continue hiding in the winepress, or will you rise up as someone who believes in this word? The biggest saboteur of purpose is not the enemy out there. It's the doubt planted inside. It's, "I'm not capable." Repeat it 1,000 times until it becomes true. But today, that lie is being undone. Because Jesus reveals to you that your value is not in how you see yourself, but in how He calls you. And He calls you brave. If this word confronts you, declare in the comments, "Jesus calls me out of hiding." But only comment if you are ready to leave the mill, face your limiting beliefs, and accept the call that heaven has already stamped on your life. And share this video with someone who needs to remember that God sees greatness where the world sees weakness. And here comes the most amazing part of this story. What if the fear of not being enough was just the prelude to a greater calling? Because what comes now is about an even more intimate pain, the pain of disappointing those you love, and the devastating weight that brings to the heart. The darkness of dawn lay like a cloud over the rooftops of Jerusalem. The streets were silent, but inside David's palace, chaos raged. He had committed the unforgivable. The king, after God's own heart, the psalmist who touched the soul of heaven, was now a man broken by his own desire. David didn't just fall into adultery with Bathsheba. He orchestrated her husband's death to cover up his sin. It was more than a scandal. It was a betrayal of his own calling. And in the silence of the palace, after the death, the blood, and the muffled screams, there remained a man who knew he had deeply disappointed the God who loved him. But Jesus reveals to you that even in this emotional abyss, there is still redemption. Create in me a pure heart, O God. Psalms 51:10. It's not a pretty prayer, It's a desperate cry from those who don't want to be thrown away. David didn't just ask for forgiveness. He asked for transformation. He knew that the problem was not just what he did, but what he allowed to be born inside him. And this deep awareness is what many avoid, because looking within is too painful, especially when you feel like you've let down the one you love most. There are people who live in prison for years not because of the sin they committed, but because of the pain of having hurt someone who trusted them, a child, a spouse, a friend, or God himself. This is one of the most silent pains of the soul, hurting the person you most wanted to protect. Guilt doesn't just scream. It settles like a poison that corrodes identity. And the question that echoes is brutal. How can I move forward knowing what I did? How can we return to praying, leading, being an example after having been so deeply disappointed? And it is in this desert of self-accusation that the Holy Spirit whispers something that defies the logic of human justice. There is still hope. Jesus reveals to you that true repentance is not a feeling, it is surrender. It's when you recognize that you cannot fix with human effort what can only be restored by divine grace. And that's what makes Psalm 51 so powerful. David did not deny his fault. He brought her to light. He opened it wide open in front of the only one who could clean it. Because there is only healing where there is truth. And there is only truth when you stop justifying the error and start crying out for a new heart. Now stop and think. Have you lived as someone who has been restored or as someone who still punishes themselves for the past? Could it be that your fear of making mistakes again is actually self-punishment in disguise? Because when you understand grace, the fear of failure doesn't disappear. It's transformed into holy fear. No longer paralyzing, but reverent. David continued to be king. He continued writing psalms, not because he ignored his mistake, but because he trusted that God was greater than him. And that changes everything. Maybe you're listening to this today with tears in your eyes, remembering something you did that destroyed someone's trust. And maybe you still see yourself as someone unworthy of talking to God, of leading, of singing, of serving. But Jesus reveals to you that the shame that keeps you on the ground no longer has power after there is true repentance. God doesn't want your performance. He wants your heart broken, because it is from the dust of repentance that the greatest worshipers are born. If that word tore you up inside, write in the comments, Jesus, create in me a pure heart. But write with your soul, like someone who is tired of punishing themselves, and ready to start over with their identity restored. And share this video with someone who needs a reminder that true repentance doesn't exclude you. It reinstates you with power, but that's not all. There is an even crueler type of fear, the fear of trying again and failing once again. And what happens next will show you why. When Jesus is in the boat, the outcome is never the same. The sound of the waves hitting the boat, mixed with the frustrated silence of the fishermen. It was early morning and the net was empty. Peter, James, John, men accustomed to the sea, knew the rhythm of the waters. They knew where to launch, when to wait. But that night, everything failed. There were no fish. There was no answer. There was just tiredness. And the cruelest thing wasn't the exhausted body, it was the discouraged soul. The fear of trying again and failing again haunted them with the strength of someone who has seen too much to believe that anything can change. They were washing the nets, a simple gesture but one that screamed giving up. It was like someone setting the table after a dinner that never happened. And perhaps you are exactly like this, washing away your emotional networks, convincing yourself that you have tried enough, that it is not worth insisting. But Jesus reveals to you that the scenario changes when he enters the boat. But at your word I will cast the net. Luke 5:5. These words of Peter were not spoken by someone full of faith. They were spoken by a man who had already failed, who was already tired, but who still dared to obey. And that changes everything. Obedience, even discredited, has more power than effort without direction. Jesus did not bring a new method of fishing, he brought presence. And when Jesus is in the boat, previous failure does not have the last word. This is one of the biggest emotional traps, believing that because something went wrong before, it will always go wrong again. Fear infiltrates memories. Every past attempt turns into evidence against you. And the worst? You begin to convince yourself that it's better not to try anymore, that it's safer to live on the shore of faith than to throw yourself back into the deep waters of trust. But Jesus reveals to you that it is precisely at this point of exhaustion that he wants to intervene. Because when you reach the end of your strength, the fertile field of miracles begins. Now think about the last time you tried something and failed. A reconciliation, a project, a prayer that had no answer, a door that didn't open. How much of that experience still dictates who you are? How much of that failure still holds your hands so you don't take risks again? The fear of trying again is paralyzing because it feeds on logic. I've done this before and it didn't work. But the kingdom of God does not operate on logic. It operates on obedience. And Pedro understood this at the most unlikely moment, in the midst of tiredness. Jesus could have performed the miracle without asking for anything. He could have filled the boat with fish for a pure show of power, but he wanted more than fish. I wanted faith, and faith is not the absence of doubt. Faith is the decision to cast the net again even when logic screams not to do so. And here's the most challenging point. Maybe your net is empty not because God has rejected you, but because he is expecting you to trust his word over your experience. Take a deep breath. Imagine Jesus getting into your boat right now, looking you in the eye and saying, "Cast the net." Are you willing? Are you ready to try again, but this time, not alone, not based on calculations or history, but solely on his voice? If this word hit you hard, comment now, "Jesus, over your word, I cast my net." But write only if you are ready to trust beyond logic, beyond fear, beyond the trauma of previous failure. And share this video with someone who needs to stop washing the net and get back to casting. But wait, what comes next will challenge everything you believe about yourself, because there is a pain that cannot be resolved with a miracle, a pain that screams, "You are a failure." And even the greatest prophets have been through this. The cave was cold, dark, and lonely. But it wasn't the stone that weighed most heavily on Elijah. It was the feeling of failure. He had just confronted 400 prophets of Baal. The fire of God had come down from heaven before an entire nation. A historic miracle, a moment of spiritual glory. And yet, all it took was a threat from Jezebel to dismantle everything. Elijah ran, not from soldiers, but from yourself, of your emotions, from fear, from exhaustion. And perhaps this is the hardest pain to explain, the feeling of being a failure even when everyone sees you as a winner. Jesus reveals to you that even the giants of faith faced deep valleys, not because of a lack of power, but because of excessive pressure. Get up and eat, because the journey will be very long for you. Warren Kings, 19:7. This isn't just a verse. It's divine intervention in a time of emotional breakdown. God did not rebuke Elijah for being there. He didn't question his faith. He did not require explanations. God only provided bread and water. Because there are times when what you need most isn't more revelation. It's recovery. Elijah didn't run away because he was weak. He ran away because he was exhausted. And this emotional exhaustion can generate the false feeling that you have failed, that you are not enough, that everything was in vain. How many times have you felt this way, exhausted after giving it your all, feeling that, even after you did everything right, something inside you fell apart? It's the kind of pain that many hide. Because admitting you're tired in an environment of faith sometimes feels like a sin. But Jesus reveals something liberating to you. Recognizing your exhaustion is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of humanity, and it is in this vulnerable place that God prepares the greatest new beginnings. Elijah asked for death. Yes, the same prophet who made fire come down from the heavens wished he didn't exist. This isn't just melancholy, it's despair. And yet, God did not reject him. It didn't replace it. God restored him. Because the mission doesn't end when you collapse. It just pauses for you to be healed. The sense of failure that Elias felt was fueled by isolation, by lack of perspective, by untreated fatigue. And that's how the enemy works. He doesn't need to destroy your faith. He just needs to convince you that you are a burden. But listen. To this, Jesus reveals to you that your value does not decrease because you needed to rest. Elijah's pause in the cave was not intentional abandonment. It was divine strategy. Sometimes the biggest step of faith is to stop. It's admitting that you need to be fed before you can continue. And God, as he did with Elijah, comes with warm bread, fresh water, and a still small voice that reminds you, you are still mine. There is still a way, and I will still use you. If this word spoke to you on a level that only tears can explain, comment now. Jesus, sustain me in my desert. But only comment if you have the courage to expose your pain before the sky, because there is a cure available. Share this video with someone who carries the feeling of failure in silence. Maybe it's the word that will save their soul. But there is a pain that prevents you from leaving where you are not because of the fear of failing, but because of the fear of being judged. And what happens now will confront what you believe about identity, reputation, and the look of Jesus. There was something strange in the air that afternoon. The streets were full, but all eyes were focused on one man. He was despised, marginalized, someone no one expected to see in the Master's presence. Zacchaeus, the tax collector, was known as a traitor to the people, a thief disguised as an official. His sins were public, his wounds hidden. And yet, Jesus reveals to you that it was precisely in that rejected figure that he wanted to make his home. Because when everyone is pointing fingers, Jesus is looking at the heart. Zacchaeus climbed a tree not just to see better. He was trying to escape the judgment of others, but at the same time, seeking to be seen by the one who saw beyond appearances. And then, in a moment of absolute surprise, Jesus stops. Look up, and he says, Zacchaeus, come down quickly because today I want to stay at your house. Luke 19:5. This phrase was not just an invitation to a meal. It was a break with the religious standard. It was an affront to human expectations. Because in that moment, Jesus reveals to you that it's not about merit, it's about mercy. Zacchaeus was not the holiest, nor the most prepared, but he was the hungriest for change. And that was enough to attract heaven's attention. How many today live hidden behind spiritual masks, afraid of what others will think if they know who they really are? How many avoid truly seeking Jesus because they have already convinced themselves that they are too unworthy, too marked, too sinful? The story of Zacchaeus confronts this lie, because Jesus does not choose based on reputation. He chooses based on surrender. And what Jesus saw in that man, no one else saw. While the eyes of the people saw a thief, the eyes of Jesus saw a lost son who finally wanted to return home. And here comes the most painful point. Often, the fear of trying again does not come from the possibility of making a mistake, but from the certainty that if we make a mistake, we will be judged and not welcomed. What kind of gospel have we lived where people are more afraid of the church than of the fall itself? Zacchaeus didn't climb the tree for status. He climbed because he believed that from there it might be harder to be stoned. And yet, Jesus said, "Come down." And today, this word echoes in hearts imprisoned by the fear of other people's judgment. Jesus reveals it to you. Let go of your defensiveness. Come down from your position of shame, because he wants to dwell precisely in the place of your most secret pain. If this message confronts you to the point of making your heart beat faster, comment now. Jesus, come into my house, even with the broken doors. But comment only if you're willing to let him see the mess you're trying so hard to hide. And if you know someone who feels rejected because of their own mistakes, send them the word. It may be that, like Zacchaeus, he is just waiting for a call to come down. And if you think that's already strong, wait until you find out what happened to a disciple who lived with Jesus, saw miracles up close, but was still overcome by doubt, and almost gave up completely. The next story will expose a pain that many feel, but few have the courage to admit. Have you ever been faced with something so grand, so impossible to believe, that your first impulse was to protect yourself with doubt? Have you ever felt that believing again would be like throwing yourself off a cliff and trusting that God would catch you, even after so many previous falls? This is where the story of a man who many call an unbeliever comes into play, but few allow themselves to see with compassion. Thomas, one of Jesus' disciples. A man who walked alongside the Master, who listened to his words, saw miracles with his own eyes, but who, even so, at the most decisive moment, let doubt win. While the others said with euphoria, "We have seen the Lord," Thomas, wounded inside and perhaps still in mourning, responds, "Unless I see the sign of the nails in his hands and put my finger in the place of the nails, and my hand in his side, I will never believe." This response was not born of arrogance, but of pain. Accumulated disappointments create walls around faith, and often the fear of being disappointed again disguises itself as skepticism. But Jesus reveals something powerful to you here. He does not turn away from those who doubt. He approaches. He does not confront Thomas with reproof, but with an offer of presence. 8 days later, Jesus appears again, and he goes straight to meet Thomas. Not a single word of accusation, just an invitation. "Put your finger here, see my hands, stretch out your hand and put it in my side." And then he adds, "Do not be unbelievers, but believers." Jesus knew what Thomas needed, and he knows what you need. Maybe you've also heard that inner voice that whispers to you day after day, "There's no point in trying. You'll fail again." Maybe you haven't said it out loud, but your heart is exhausted from waiting, exhausted from praying, exhausted from deluding yourself, and his doubt became a shield. But pay attention to this. Jesus didn't just come for the strong, he came for the hurting. He did not come for those who never wavered, but for those who are trapped between the fear of believing and the despair of giving up. Thomas was not excluded because of his doubt. He was reached by her. And if even a disciple who saw the impossible doubted, could his fear really be a lack of faith? Or is there something much deeper going on inside you? What's more, isn't this doubt, in fact, a hidden cry for help? A cry camouflaged by reason, but which screams in silence, "Jesus, show me that." It is still worth believing. Jesus' response continues to echo today in the same way it echoed in that closed upper room. Do not be unbelievers, but believers. This is not a scolding. It's a calling. It is a reminder that faith is not born of strength, but of presence. And his presence is still real, even when your mind screams otherwise. So if that voice inside you says that everything is going to fail again, I ask you boldly, will you continue listening to the voice of doubt, or will you start making room for the voice of Jesus? If this word touched something deep within you, comment now. Doubt does not define my faith. Declare this as an act of breaking with these inner lies. But wait, there is something even deeper, quieter, and more paralyzing than doubt. Because even when faith begins to sprout again, there is a dark cycle that destroys the strength to continue. Something that many have been experiencing for years, without even realizing it. And what comes next could be the turning point for your journey. Because when the soul has tried 1,000 times and always gives up halfway, what is left? Get ready. What is about to be revealed will confront something you may have accepted as normal. But Jesus reveals to you, it is not normal to live like this. There is a type of pain that does not bleed on the outside, but tears on the inside. An invisible cycle that imprisons even the most determined, trying with everything you have, and giving up along the way. And not because the desire is over, but because the strength was sucked away, because the fear of yet another frustration is greater than the desire to win. How many times have you started something with faith, with plans, with enthusiasm, but in the middle of the process, something fell apart inside you? Sometimes it's a disappointment in others, sometimes it's a personal downfall, but most of the time, what really brings us down is the voice inside that says, "You can't." And it is in this place of emotional exhaustion, when no longer praying seems possible, that Jesus reveals something that can break this cycle forever. Because it's not about trying harder, nor about being braver. It is about being sustained by a grace that goes beyond your own strength. Imagine Paul, a man filled with the Spirit, who wrote letters that to this day move the heart of the church. An apostle who faced prisons, floggings, shipwrecks, persecutions. But even with all this spiritual authority, he carried a weight that caused him to repeatedly cry out, "Lord, take this away from me." The text does not reveal exactly what the thorn in the flesh was, but it was something that bothered him deeply, something that made him feel limited, unable, weak. And the most surprising thing is that God did not remove the thorn. Instead, he released a word that redefines everything we understand about spiritual strength. "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Can you feel the weight of it? The power of God is not activated when you are strong, but when you are at the end of your tether. It's when you stop trusting your own ability that he begins to act in a supernatural way. This confronts much of what we hear in the Christian walk. The idea that if you had more faith, you wouldn't give up, or that if you had more anointing, you wouldn't fall. But is giving up always a sign of weakness? Or are there sincere, thirsty people who are just exhausted from fighting with their own hands? Paulo didn't pretend that everything was fine. He prayed, cried, asked, and when God's response was, "I won't take away, but I will support you," something changed. He didn't just accept the pain, he gloried in it, because he understood that his weakness was not a curse. It was a portal to the manifestation of God's glory. What seemed like the end was actually the place where grace began. And maybe that's what you need to hear today, that this cycle of frustrated attempts does not define your identity, that giving up doesn't have to be your default, that there is a strength that does not come from you, and that only reveals itself when you surrender. Have you ever wondered why so many strong people fall apart in silence? Why do spiritual leaders, pastors, intercessors, prayer mothers sometimes fall into depression, anxiety, or abandon everything? Because they tried to be too strong for too long, without allowing grace to sustain them. And maybe this is your case. You have tried sincerely, but the pain is weighing more than the hope. And if this message is touching something deep within you right now, then stop everything for a moment and listen. Jesus reveals to you that it's not about trying anymore. It's about resting more in the sufficiency of grace. You are not called to win with your own weapons. You were called to be a channel of his strength, even when your soul screams that it can no longer take a step, and if you still think you failed because you gave up, maybe you're seeing the battle through the wrong eyes. Sometimes, giving up is not failing. It's admitting that you can't do it alone. And in this place of confession, grace covers you, surrounds you, and lifts you up. She is not an emotional release. It is a concrete force that transforms discouragement into persistence, fear into faith, tiredness into power. But this takes courage, courage to admit that you have reached your limit, and boldness to trust that God is still with you, even when everything about you seems broken. Now I challenge you. What if this thorn that you reject so much is exactly what God will use to transform you? Do you have the courage to pray like Paul and say, "Lord, if not to take away, then give me grace to continue"? Or are you still stuck in the illusion that you will only be victorious when you are free from all pain? Be careful. Maybe this is the lie that keeps you trapped in the cycle of giving up. Write in the comments now, sincerely, "I accept the grace that sustains me." This statement could be the key to the breakup you've been waiting for years. But there is a wound even quieter than that. A trauma that not only paralyzes but redefines who a person believes they are. A type of pain that comes not from circumstances, but from betrayal. And when it comes from someone who is supposed to protect you, the impact is devastating. What if I told you that what comes now could rewrite the way you see everything that has hurt you so far? Take a deep breath, because Jesus reveals to you that even what hurt you can become healing for others. And what you're about to see could radically change the way you deal with your past. Some pains don't scream, they whisper for years. You move on, you work, you smile, you interact. But inside, there is an invisible prison built by memories that no one else sees. These are old wounds hidden behind current decisions. No matter how much time passes, whenever you try to move forward, something pulls you back. And the cruelest thing is that this paralysis is not physical. It is emotional, spiritual, and it makes you believe that you will never be free. But Jesus reveals to you that even the worst betrayals can be the beginning of your healing. Imagine the scene. A 17-year-old teenager being thrown into a dark well by his own brothers. The first feeling is shock, then comes fear, and then despair. His name is Joseph. And if you think your family hurt you, reflect for a moment on what it meant to be betrayed for your blood, sold as merchandise by those who were supposed to protect you. Joseph was left behind, not by strangers, but by those who shared the same home, the same blood, the same father. That cistern wasn't just a physical hole. It was a psychological trauma that would spread throughout his youth. And the most striking thing about this story is that Jose's suffering did not end there. He was bought as a slave, unfairly accused, by a manipulative woman, thrown into a hopeless prison, forgotten by those who promised to help him. There were entire years of pain, loneliness, injustice, and divine silence. Now think with me. How can you trust God when everything around you is evidence that He has abandoned you? How can you believe that there is a purpose in suffering when what you experience is a succession of losses and disappointments? Jose spent more than a decade reaping the consequences of an evil he did not cause. And even so, he didn't give in to resentment. He didn't let pain define his identity. Because even though the well was real, he did not allow the well to live inside him. And that is a choice that few have the courage to make. Most people become hostages to what they have suffered. They live as eternal victims of a past that still bleeds inside. And here's the question that will confront something deep within you. Is what paralyzes you today really the fear of failure? Or is it the trauma of being hurt when you were most vulnerable? Joseph reached the throne of Egypt, the highest position a foreigner could reach. But the real miracle was not his becoming governor. It was his heart to remain intact. Because years later, when his brothers kneel before him, begging for forgiveness, Joseph had all the power in the world in his hands. He could get revenge. He could make them feel everything he felt. But what does he do? He cries. He hugs them. And he says, "You meant evil against me, but God turned it to good, to save many lives." This phrase has a supernatural power because it carries a revelation that can break chains today. What hurt you doesn't have to be the end of your story. It could be the starting point of your mission. What if the trauma that has paralyzed you to this day is exactly what God will use to free others? Healed people become healing agents, but this requires a radical decision. Stop seeking revenge. Stop harboring hurt. Stop giving the past the right to write your future. Do you have that courage? Because the world will tell you to protect yourself, not to trust, to build walls. But Jesus reveals something else to you. Forgiving is not forgetting, it is stopping bleeding. It's saying, it hurt me, but it won't dominate me. And here is the most challenging invitation yet. Comment now if this word spoke to you. Write, "What hurt me does not define me." Declare this as a prophetic act, a break from trauma narratives. But what comes now will confront you, even more deeply. What if what you call God's silence is actually the sound of His care preserving you? If the fact that it hasn't worked yet is protection and not punishment? There is a story that few people read carefully, but which reveals one of the most distorted feelings of human beings: the belief that God has abandoned us. And what you will hear now could forever change the way you interpret waiting time in your life. Prepare your heart, because Jesus reveals to you that even your escape can be within the plan. There is a feeling that when it sets in, does not scream, but consumes in silence. She is sneaky, smiling on the outside and devastating on the inside. It is the feeling of having been forgotten by God, to be walking, breathing, living, but without direction. As if your story was on pause, as if the sky was closed, as if the Father had given up on you without warning. This type of pain is not expressed with tears. It is often hidden in routine, in apathy, in giving up disguised as realism. And that's when Jesus reveals to you a truth that's as powerful as it is uncomfortable. It's not God who moves away from you. Often it's you who runs away from Him. And that's exactly what happened to Jonas. But the most shocking thing is not the fact that he ran away. What really confronts us is that, even though we fled, God followed. Jonah's story begins with a calling. Clear, direct, non-negotiable. God says, "Go to Nineveh and preach against that city." But Jonas runs in the opposite direction, and not just physically. He decides not to obey and gets on a boat heading to Tarshish, the opposite end of the mission God gave him. Now stop and think. How many times have you done this? How many times have you felt God pulling you towards one path, and you chose the other, perhaps out of fear, insecurity, or tiredness? But here's the twist. Even when Jonah fled, God didn't fold His arms. The Lord sends a storm. The vessel almost breaks apart. The sailors panic. Jonas, however, is sleeping. And this scene is brutally symbolic. When you run away from God, the storm outside will never be greater than the torpor of the soul inside. Jonas confesses his guilt. He knows he is there because of his disobedience, and he asks to be thrown into the sea, not as an act of courage, but as a final escape. And then, something extraordinary happens. Instead of letting it sink, God sends a fish, not as punishment, but as shelter. Because sometimes, what seems like rock bottom is actually the womb of a new beginning. Inside the fish, Jonah prays, "Cry out," and he recognizes, "In my distress I cried out to the Lord, and He answered me." Here's the shocker. Jonah doesn't cry out when he's safe. He cries out when he is in the dark, when everything seems to be over, when the only way out is to surrender. And that might be the key you need, because you too may be running away while feeling like you are being forgotten. But the escape never cancels the calling. And God's silence is often the preparation for a reunion that begins when you stop running and start crying. How many people today are like Jonas, sitting inside the fish of your own, Life, isolated, confused, stopped, thinking that God gave up, when in fact he is just waiting for the cry to move out of pride and into repentance. And here's something even stronger. God didn't answer Jonah because of his performance. He responded because of his sincerity. Because Jesus reveals to you that there is no escape that can overcome the love that pursues you. God never gives up. Not even when you give up on him. Not even when you hide. Not even when you think it's too late. What you call the end, God calls the process. But the truth is harsh. Has God really stopped using you? Or has it been you who has stopped allowing yourself to be found? This question needs to be faced. Because as long as you continue to blame divine silence for your paralysis, you will remain trapped in a cycle of escape and frustration. It is not God who gave up on you. It's you who stopped listening. But if today, with humility, you decide to cry out, the answer will come. Not because you deserve it, but because he never stopped loving. And when the fish vomits Jonah onto the beach, it's as if heaven says, "You're back. Now go." The call is the same. The mission is still on. And grace, stronger than ever. If this touched your spirit, write in the comments now. God never gave up on me. Not as a beautiful phrase, but as an act of faith. Publicly declare that your story is not over. And allow this truth to sink deeper than any accusation that has echoed in your mind until today. What if I told you that, even after being reconciled with God, many people still live chained to the past by a feeling that no one likes to confess? Shame for who they were, what they did, where they went, and worse, they think that because of this, they will never be used again. Get ready. Because the next story will show you that Jesus reveals something that confronts religion and frees the heart. Because if someone who was completely discredited because of sin was turned into an apostle, who says you are disqualified? Sometimes what stops you from getting up is not the weight of the mistake, but the shame of having fallen. And she doesn't scream like an accuser. She whispers. And these whispers are so constant that they become part of your identity. You don't deserve it. You went too far. You got too dirty to come back. The pain of feeling disqualified because of your own sin is like walking with invisible chains. You even try to follow, try to serve, try to worship, but something pulls you back, and this force has a name: condemnation. But Jesus reveals to you that the cross is not a place for the perfect. It is the starting point for the broken, and if there is anyone in the Bible who understood this deeply, it was Paul. Before being an apostle, before writing letters that transformed generations, he was a persecutor, killer of Christians, a feared name among followers of Jesus, a man whose history, if it were cut short before the road to Damascus, would be remembered only for blood and hatred. Paul did not fall. He lived prostrate within a religious zeal that made him kill in the name of a distorted faith. Until an encounter changes everything, and it wasn't a subtle encounter, it was an impact. A light knocks him off his horse. The voice of Jesus himself confronts him. "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" And here is the watershed moment. Jesus could have destroyed Paul, could have punished, eliminated, but he chooses you. Jesus doesn't just forgive you, he sends you. He turns the persecutor into a preacher, the most unworthy instrument of grace. And Paul, now filled with the Spirit, writes to Timothy, "Christ came to save sinners, of whom I am chief." Not in the past, in the present. He doesn't say, "I went." He says, "I am." Because the consciousness of sin does not disappear with time. What changes is the place from which it is viewed, the cross. How many people today sabotage themselves spiritually because they believe their sin has disqualified them from any future with God? How many prayers have been silenced by shame? How many vocations have been shelved because someone heard that you are no longer useful? But what if I told you that what disqualifies you in the eyes of men is exactly what qualifies you for grace? The cross is not a resume. It is surrender. And Jesus does not choose as men choose. He looks at the heart even when it is broken. In fact, especially when it is. Because when everything in you says it's over, he still says it has begun. The power of the gospel is not just about cleaning up your history. It's about giving it new meaning. And if Paul, the greatest persecutor of the church, could be transformed into one of the greatest apostles who ever lived, then who dares say that you cannot be used? The mistake you made may have hurt your image, but it does not cancel out what God put in you. And here's something that needs to be faced with courage. Are you really sorry or just embarrassed? Because regret changes roots. But shame makes you hide like Adam, trying to cover with leaves what only blood can clean. And if you live in spiritual hiding, you may still be trying to justify yourself. Stop. The blood has already been spilled. The pardon has already been granted, and the call still stands. But you have to choose. Will you continue to believe the accusation, or will you decide to walk by grace? The question is direct, almost uncomfortable. Who convinced you that you are no longer useful? Was it God, or was it the trauma, the guilt, the judgment of others? Who taught you that calling depends on an intact reputation? Because the entire Bible is made up of redeemed failures. If this message is tearing something up inside you, then rise up spiritually now and write in the comments, "My sin does not cancel God's purpose." Declare this boldly with tears if necessary. Make it a public renunciation of the shame that imprisons you. But that's not all. Because even when grace restores, there is another challenge that arises. The fear of starting over. The fear of trying again. To take a step and fall. Of trusting and being disappointed again. To launch yourself and fail. And it is exactly at this point that Jesus reveals something so profound that it will realign your soul. Because there is a story after a catastrophe where what seemed lost became the exact point where God began to rebuild everything. And what comes now could be exactly the revelation that will free you from the fear of starting over. Take a deep breath. Because a fresh start does not depend on perfection. It depends on faith. There is a quiet anxiety that sets in when the dust from a major storm begins to settle. The worst is over, but the fear is still there. The trauma still pulses. And now, faced with the possibility of starting over, a question arises that paralyzes me inside. What if I fail again? This is the anguish that almost no one confesses, but that lives in the hearts of those who have faced devastating losses. Because the problem is not just rebuilding, it's rebuilding on the ruins of what collapsed. And that's when Jesus reveals to you that a new beginning does not depend on what you have, but on who remembers you in the silence. When everything quiets down and it seems like God has disappeared, that's when he acts most powerfully. And no one experienced this as intensely as Noah. Imagine the scene, a righteous, obedient, God-fearing man surrounded by a wicked generation. He builds an ark, following detailed instructions, despite being ridiculed by everyone. He believes the promise. He preaches. He waits. And then the rain comes. 40 days of flood. Months of water covering everything. The world as he knew it is destroyed. And after fulfilling everything that God commanded, Noah enters into silence. The text is clear. The waters prevailed over the earth 150 days. And after that, nothing. The sky is silent. God no longer speaks. There is no direction. There is no answer. just the sound of water shaking the ark. And here is the point that tears many apart. When you obey, believe, give everything, but even so, God remains silent. Have you ever felt this? Have you ever been in a place where you did everything right, took all the steps of faith, and still found yourself thrown into a cycle of agonizing waiting? It is at this point that the fear of starting over arises. It's not the fear of starting from scratch. It's the fear of starting without God. But then, in the verse that changes everything, it is written, "But God remembered Noah." This phrase is one of the most love-filled in all of Scripture, because she is not saying that God had forgotten before. It is saying that even without speaking, he was present, and at the exact moment he acts. Make a wind blow, the waters begin to recede, open a path where before there was only destruction, and once again Noah waits. He releases a crow, then a dove. Nothing. Days later he releases another. Nothing. Only the third time does she return with an olive branch, sign that life is returning. But pay attention to the detail. Even after all this, Noah does not leave the ark on his own. He waits for God to speak, and only then does the Lord say, "Come out of the ark, you, your wife, and your children." The fresh start is only safe when it is accompanied by the voice, and this is what Jesus reveals to you today. It is not the scenario that validates your new beginning. It is the presence. As long as you try to start over because you need to, because you're tired, because you think you've waited too long, you could be putting everything to waste. But when you wait for his time, even if it seems too long, he remembers. He blows a new wind. He opens the earth, and what seemed lost becomes fertile soil for a new cycle. But let's be honest. How many of us are willing to wait that long? How many are willing to trust when all there is silence? The truth is uncomfortable. Many start over out of impulse, out of lack, out of desperation. And then, when everything falls apart again, they blame God. But was it really him who told you to leave the ark? Or was it you who forced the door? There are times when faith is not measured by action, but by patience. It's not how much you move, but how long you can wait. And that's not weakness. It is obedience in its purest form. The question that remains is, can you trust a God who seems to be silent, but who still sees you? If this word spoke directly to your heart, express yourself now in the comments with courage. Even in silence, I know that God reminds me. Write as one who is opening the ark by faith, as if to say, I'm not going to start over alone. Let this comment be more than a sentence. Let it be a delivery, a surrender to God's perfect timing. But what if I told you that, even after waiting, being reminded, obeying, there is still a challenge that breaks many? The challenge of starting over and not seeing progress, of walking, obeying, trying, and nothing happening. How to deal with the frustration of knowing you're on the right path, but not getting out of place. There is a story, a scene, a command from Jesus that breaks this spiritual paralysis. And what comes now could be just the jolt your soul needs to get back on its feet. Because Jesus reveals to you that spiritual stagnation is not a place. It is a state. And there is a command released that changes everything. Get ready, because what's about to be revealed could lift you to your feet like never before. Have you ever felt like you're stuck in the same place while the whole world seems to move forward? Have you ever had the feeling of being stuck in a routine of unfulfilled promises, unanswered prayers, and unfruitful attempts? This silent frustration, which settles like a constant shadow, is one of the most heartbreaking pains of the soul, because it doesn't come with explosions. It comes with repetitions. Equal days, equal fights, hopes that are born and die before they even mature. And it is in this scenario that Jesus reveals to you one of the most striking scenes in the entire gospel. The encounter between Jesus and a man paralyzed not only in body, but in hope. The pool of Bethesda was not just a place of healing. It was, for many, the symbol of exclusion, a space where miracles happened, yes, but always for the fastest, the strongest, the most helped. And this man had been there for 38 years, 38, waiting, watching others pass in front of you, listening to the waters move, wanting but never getting it, dreaming but with no one to put him in the tank. Now take a deep breath and imagine the scene. Jesus approaches, and the first question he asks is not, "What is your pain?" nor, "How long have you been like this?" The question is another. Do you want to be healed? Seems obvious, doesn't it? But it's not. Because this man's paralysis was no longer just physical. It was emotional. It was existential. And perhaps Jesus' question for you today is also this. Do you really want to get out of this stagnation, or have you gotten used to it? Because when you wait too long for something that never arrives, there's a real risk that your identity will become mixed up with your suffering itself. You no longer know who you are without the pain. You can no longer imagine yourself without the problem. You no longer know what it would be like to live without just surviving. And this is the cruelest prison, the one that makes progress seem impossible not because of a lack of faith, but because of an excess of frustration. Jesus did not wait for the tank to move. He didn't look for justifications. He didn't ask for explanations. He gave an order, a simple and powerful word: get up, take up your bed, and walk. 3 verbs that break the cycle of stagnation, 3 commands that break decades of immobility. And the most extraordinary thing is not the miracle itself, but the way it happened. Because the man was not healed within the system he knew, he was healed outside the tank. And maybe this confronts you. You are waiting for God to move waters when he wants to move you. You are waiting for the method when the Master himself is before you. The miracle doesn't have to come the way you imagined. He just needs an answer from you. How many times have you said, "No one helps me, no one sees me, no one understands me"? Well, listen to this now with an open heart. Jesus reveals to you that his gaze is deeper than anyone else's. And when he says, "Get up," he's not just talking to your legs. He's talking to your faith, with your dignity, with your purpose. The bed that supported you while you were paralyzed will now bear witness to your restoration. And here's something that will confront you deeply. Is your problem not the absence of progress, but the resistance to change? Because there are people who complain about stagnation, but when the Spirit blows, they cling to what is familiar. They prefer the immobile tank to the command to walk in faith. You need to decide whether you're going to continue waiting for something that doesn't depend on you, or whether you're going to respond to what God is already saying. Because the voice of Jesus still echoes, "Get up." And getting up is not easy. It involves risk, pain, effort. But it is this movement that activates the miracle. Maybe you don't see results because you are still lying emotionally in places that God has already told you to abandon. Places of victimhood, comparison, lament, and until you rise up, the promises will continue to seem distant. It's time to take a stand. Not emotionally, not socially, spiritually, because what holds you back today no longer has authority over you. If this word was like a holy push in your soul, write in the comments right now, boldly, "I rise today," declare. This as someone who breaks decades of waiting, like someone who transforms frustration into movement. Not just with your fingers, but with your heart. But that's not all. Because even after getting up, there is a pain that still prevents thousands of people from moving forward in peace. The pain of praying and not hearing an answer. The pain of the silence of heaven. The feeling of doing everything right and yet not seeing anything change. And what comes next will confront this area of your faith like never before. Because Jesus reveals to you that it is not an absence of response. It is the construction of a faith that goes beyond what is seen. Get ready. Because the silence you hate may be holding the miracle you need most. There is a pain that does not scream, but bleeds in silence. A pain that seems to have no form, but that consumes inside like a fire hidden under ashes, the pain of praying and not seeing an answer. Anyone who has experienced this type of waiting knows the bitter taste of spiritual frustration. It's the feeling of talking to the sky and hearing the echo of your own voice. It's bending your knees, opening your heart, crying at dawn, and at dawn, seeing everything exactly the same. Have you ever felt this way? Have you ever carried a promise like someone holding a weight that seems to bend your shoulders instead of lifting them? And most importantly, have you ever wondered why God takes time? Or worse, if he really listened? It is in this scenario of silent anguish that Anna's story becomes a living revelation for everyone waiting for something that never seems to come. Anna was sterile, and in a culture where a woman's value was tied to motherhood, this was more than physical pain. It was a social stigma, a daily humiliation. To make matters worse, Penina, Elkanah's other wife, constantly provoked Hannah, and it wasn't just jealousy, it was mockery. Each year during the climbs to the temple, Anna cried, "I fasted, I didn't eat." His soul bled in silence, and perhaps what most tears those who are in the process of waiting is not the time, it is the contrast. Seeing others being blessed while you stay in the same place. Penina had children. Anna had prayers. And how many times have you felt the same way? Looking around and seeing people receiving what you asked for with tears, and not just once, but for years? But Jesus reveals something profound to you in this story. At the height of her pain, Anna does something that redefines the way we should wait. She enters the temple and pours out her soul before the Lord. But she doesn't scream. She doesn't make a scene. She doesn't negotiate. She just prays, in silence. His lips move, but no sound comes out. The priest Eli sees this and, at first, judges her. He thinks she is drunk. Yet another injustice for those who already suffer, in silence. But Hannah responds sweetly, "No, my lord, I am a woman of troubled spirit. I have not drunk wine or strong drink, but I have poured out my soul before the Lord." And that phrase, that attitude, that gesture, carries a strength that few realize. Praying in silence is one of the greatest acts of faith, because it means believing that God hears even what no one else can hear. And then, after years of waiting, she receives a prophetic word from Eli. "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you the petition you asked of him." And there, something changes, not externally, but inside her. This is where the story turns. Because the Bible says that after this prayer, Hannah returned home and was no longer sad. Pay attention, nothing had changed. She wasn't pregnant, yet. I still didn't have a child in my arms. But something within her had already been generated, a faith that transcends logic, the conviction that God had heard. And more than that, the willingness to rest on the promise even before seeing it fulfilled. And then, at the right time, and this detail matters a lot, at the right time, Anna conceives Samuel. And when she presents him in the temple, she says something that resonates to this day. "For this boy I prayed." This phrase has power, because she validates every tear, every night of despair, every silent cry. And she also confronts, because it makes us ask, are we praying with this conviction, or are we just complaining about the silence? We often confuse silence with absence. But Jesus reveals to you today that heaven does not remain silent due to indifference. He remains silent by construction. God's silence is not empty, it is fertile. He is generating something in you that needs to mature before being born. And yes, sometimes he takes time, but not because you forgot, It's because it's preparing you to carry what's to come. Perhaps your prayer has not yet been answered, because God is more interested in transforming you than in delivering the blessing. Maybe waiting is the exact time needed to make you strong, enough not to lose what He has already set aside. And here's a question that may be uncomfortable. Are you ready to receive what you're asking for? Because sometimes God doesn't respond yet. To protect you from yourself. If this word confronted your soul and gave you the courage to continue waiting, declare in the comments with faith and vulnerability, "I will not stop praying." Write like someone who decided to continue even without seeing. Like someone who chooses to trust even without understanding. Like Hannah, because heaven may be silent, but God has already risen from the throne to act in your favor. What if I told you that even after the answer, many are still afraid? Fear of changing. Fear of accepting that they can be different. Fear of becoming what they always said they wouldn't be. What comes next will break with this lie you were told. Because Jesus reveals to you that no one is too far away to be transformed. And the next biblical character shows this with an intensity that will deconstruct you inside. What He did for a man considered irrecoverable, He can do it for you, too. Get ready, because what you hear now could change your story. Sometimes waiting isn't the most painful thing, nor the silence of God. Not even repeated failure. What gnaws most inside is the fear that, even with all this, you will never change. It's the weight of carrying a history of attempts, broken promises, and relapses. And then, the subtle voice of condemnation sets in. You were born this way. You will always be this way. Some people just don't change. And if you have already believed this, know that this lie is an invisible prison, and that Jesus now reveals to you how to break these chains. Imagine living dominated by something that no one can control. Imagine being known only by your condition, and not by your name. Imagine living isolated, in caves among graves, as if you were dead while alive. This was the state of the Gadarene man. He no longer had an identity. He was just the demoniac, marginalized, rejected, trapped in chains that he himself broke. But that did not free him. Because the problem was not in the physical currents. I was in the inner prison. And maybe you see yourself like this today. You've already broken relationships, cycles, promises, but something inside you is still trapped. And the worst thing is when you yourself start to believe that it is irreversible. But then Jesus enters that region, the land of the Gadarenes, a place shunned by the religious, despised by the Jews. And this is already a sign that He goes where no one wants to go to reach those who everyone has already given up on. And when He sets foot there, before He even speaks, He is confronted by that man, a scream, a confusion between human and spiritual voice, a cry from someone who deep down still had hope. What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? And here's the detail that almost no one notices. Even though he was full of demons, that man still recognized who Jesus was. This means that no matter how far someone has gone, there is something within us that still recognizes the presence. Jesus does not ask how many sins he has committed, nor how long he was in that condition. He asks for the name. Because where the world saw a monster, Jesus looked for an identity. Legion, that's what he replied. But that wasn't the real answer. It was the name of pain, of oppression, of the imposed condition. And how many times do we also define ourselves by what hurt us? I'm anxious. I'm a failure. I'm unclean. I'm addicted. No, you're not that. You are injured, but you have a name. And Jesus reveals to you that He did not die for a label. He died for a son, for a daughter, by someone He knows by name, even when everything seems to have been forgotten. Then Jesus orders those spirits to leave, And what happens next is as profound as it is miraculous. The man who was once feared is now seated, dress, and in perfect sense. The transformation was so radical that the city's residents, upon seeing it, were frightened, because sometimes miracles are more shocking than tragedy. It's easier for people to get used to your failure than to accept your change. And if you are afraid of changing because it will break the expectations of those who have become accustomed to your pain, it's time to break those chains too. But there is another detail that leaves you floored. After being healed, that man begs to follow Jesus. He wants to go along, leave behind the place of shame. But Jesus says, "Return to your house and tell everything that God has done for you." In other words, the place where you were most humiliated will be exactly the stage for your greatest preaching. The same people who rejected you will be the people who will see the glory of God in you. And that's when you understand. It's not enough to be transformed. You need to assume your new identity. And that takes courage. How many people who have already been freed still live as prisoners of other people's opinions? How many are healed, but afraid to say out loud, "Jesus changed me"? If this word confronted the bottom of your heart, comment now, "I am not the one who hurt me." Write as an act of faith, as a cry for freedom, as someone who breaks the silence and positions themselves as a new creature. Because while hell tries to remind you of your past, Jesus writes about your future. But if you think that this transformation is the end of the fight, get ready, because there is still something deeper. What if I told you there was a difference between regret and guilt, and that this difference can mean life or death? Next, let's dive into one of the most disturbing stories in Scripture. Two men, two mistakes, two completely different endings. And what made all the difference was a decision that you also need to make today. What comes now could be the turning point of your journey. Get ready, because Jesus reveals to you the root of guilt and the way to not drown in it. Some pains don't scream. They are silent. It corrodes from the inside, little by little, with the slowness of someone who knows exactly where to hurt. This is how guilt works. It doesn't arrive suddenly like a bolt of lightning from a clear sky. She insinuates herself, hides behind unresolved regrets. And when left untreated, it does what no visible prison can do. It turns a free soul into a willing hostage. Jesus reveals to you now that the difference between a repentance that restores and a guilt that destroys can completely change the ending of your story. The narrative of two men, Judas and Peter, is perhaps one of the most disturbing comparisons in the New Testament. Both walked with Jesus. Both failed. One cheated. The other denied it. They both looked into the eyes of those they loved and, even so, they chose error. But while one ended in death and despair, the other was restored and became one of the largest columns in the church. And here's the question that spans generations. What set them apart? What separates a broken destiny from a redeemed life? The answer lies where few pay attention, in the way they deal with guilt. Judas was overcome by conscience. He realized the weight of what he had done. He returned the 30 coins. He confessed his sin. But at no point did he run to Jesus. He tried to take the pain into his own hands. He tried to return the problem, but did not seek forgiveness. And when the pain became unbearable, he chose despair. He hanged himself. Because unaddressed guilt leads to death, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual. Peter, on the other hand, was also consumed by tears. He denied Jesus 3 times, ran away. He hid. But unlike Judas, he stayed. He remained. He wept bitterly, but he did not escape the gaze of Christ. And at the most unlikely moment, on the edge of a lake, after the resurrection, Jesus calls him, not to condemn him, but to cure him. 3 times Jesus asks, "Do you love me?" 3 times, one for each denial, Because Jesus doesn't just want to forgive us. He wants to restore us completely. And maybe you're trapped in an invisible prison of guilt, trying to pay for your mistakes with emotional sacrifices, moving away from people, self-sabotaging, depriving yourself of joy, because deep down, you feel like you no longer deserve to be happy. And this is where the difference that can save your soul comes in. Guilt keeps you from the cross. Regret takes you straight to it. Guilt makes you run from Jesus' gaze. Repentance makes you immerse yourself in Him. Guilt says, I failed, I am a mistake. Repentance says, I was wrong, but I am a son. And Jesus reveals it to you. You are not defined by failure, but by the choice you make after it. There are people who are alive but emotionally dead like Judas. They walk, work, interact, but they have already given up inside because they believed there was no going back. And if this is your case, take a deep breath now and allow yourself to receive this truth. If Peter, who denied Jesus at his worst moment, was restored, you can be too. The cross is not a reminder of your guilt. It is the altar of your new beginning. And if that word exposed a wound you've been hiding for a long time, boldly write in the comments, "Guilt won't kill me." Declare this in faith, even if your emotions say otherwise. Because faith is not feeling. Faith is believing. It's choosing the cross over emotional hanging. It's throwing yourself at the feet of Jesus, even when everything inside you screams that you don't deserve it. Because it was for you that He stretched out His arms and said, "It is finished." But wait, that's not all. Because there is a silent pain that many confuse with strength, the attempt to overcome everything alone. And you may be surprised to discover that even those who were close to Jesus tried to carry weights they were not called to bear. Next, we will dive into a scene that shows two sisters in the presence of Christ. One trying to solve everything, the other simply sitting at His feet. And Jesus reveals to you, perhaps what is stopping you from winning is the way you are trying to win. What comes now will unmask an emotional trap that is tiring you and keeping you away from true victory. Sometimes the greatest weight we carry comes not from circumstances, but from the expectation of being strong at all times. The pain of trying alone does not scream loudly like a lament. It settles in automatic gestures, in forced smiles, in the "everything is fine" that we try to say while we fall apart inside. Jesus reveals to you that often the root of the fear of failing again lies in the insistence of trying to win with our own strength, while neglecting the only presence that could really sustain everything. The scene is simple, but what it reveals is absolutely transformative. Two sisters. A house. Jesus arrives. Martha immediately takes action. Prepare everything. Run from one place to another. Try to serve in the best way possible. Apparently, she is doing everything right. After all, she is serving Jesus, isn't she? But something starts to tighten inside her. The more you do, the more overwhelmed you feel. The gaze turns to the sister, Maria, who is there, motionless, at the Master's feet. Martha can no longer stand the injustice that she herself fueled. She interrupts Jesus and in a complaining tone says, "Lord, don't you mind that my sister leaves me to serve alone?" Her question is the same as that of many exhausted hearts today. "Lord, can't you see that I'm doing it all alone? That I'm trying to keep it all together?" And then comes the answer that spans centuries and still echoes with absolute power. "Martha, Martha, you are restless and worry about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary chose the best part." The turnaround here is brutal. Jesus does not praise effort. He does not extol activism. He corrects. Because serving without intimacy is religiosity disguised as zeal. And trying to win alone without surrendering is pride dressed in responsibility. This story reveals a hidden wound. The illusion that if we do everything right, Jesus will approve of us more. That if we are perfect, he will notice us. But the truth is different. Jesus reveals to you that he is not asking you to win. He is asking you to sit down, rest, trust. Because it's not what you do for him that sustains you, it's how much you allow yourself to be sustained by him. And how many are exactly like Martha? Overloaded. Doing 1,000 things for God, but no time for God. Trying to be the solution, when in fact, they just need to go back to the place of surrender. Martha represents everyone who deep down is afraid to stop. Because if they stop, everything collapses. Because if they are not strong, no one will be. And the weight of that is cruel. But Mary shows us something powerful. Resting at the feet of Jesus is not an omission. It is wisdom. It is spiritual courage. It's choosing what really sustains the soul. And this is where the pain intensifies. How many times have you tried to win with arm strength? How many times have you tried to maintain your marriage, your emotional health, your calling, the appearance of spirituality, without ever allowing yourself to be vulnerable before him? The fear of failing again is often born not from weakness, but from the stubbornness of thinking that strength is yours. And Jesus tells you today, stop, breathe, sit down. There is a table set, and you keep trying to cook, when he just wants to feed you. If this word confronted something inside you, comment now. I will no longer try to win alone. Don't be afraid to expose your weakness. The sky moves when you admit that you can. No longer carry it all. The sky tilts when you recognize that you need to sit down. Because grace does not reach those who pretend to be well. She dives where there is truth. And Jesus reveals to you, you don't need to be strong all the time. You need to be at his feet all the time. And if this message reached you, tap the like button as an act of surrender. Share with someone who is exhausted from trying and perhaps is one step away from giving up. Your click could be God's. Embrace in someone else's life right now, but there is still something that needs to be said. Because even after everything, there are people who feel like they lost the right to try again, who believe they have already crossed the point of no return, who inside consider themselves emotionally dead. But Jesus reveals something to you that will defy your logic, break internal chains, and rekindle hope where there is only darkness. Because there is a story, a final story, that doesn't just talk about healing, but about resurrection. What is to come will show that even when everything seems lost, when there is no longer a pulse, Jesus still arrives. And when he arrives, even the impossible can breathe again. Get ready. What comes now may make your heart beat differently. You've come this far, and perhaps you still have doubts about whether it's possible to start over. After so many falls, so much pain, so much silence, perhaps fear has made you believe that you have already lost the right to try again. But Jesus now reveals to you a truth that will tear apart the darkness around you. There is no place so deep, nor time so late, where his voice cannot reach. Because what's about to happen is more than a cure. It's resurrection. Lazarus was dead. Not just sick, not just suffering. He had been buried, sealed, ignored, forgotten. The stone had already been placed, and the smell of decomposition had already filled the room. No one considered further intervention. All that was left was grief, and in grief, a broken faith. When Jesus finally arrives in Bethany 4 days later, what he finds are not people waiting for the miracle, but people resentful of the delay. Martha runs to meet him and says, "If the Lord had been here, my brother would not have died." There is pain in that sentence. There is disappointment. But there is also something deeper, the belief that Jesus can only act while there is still life. And that's when Jesus reveals to you what few understand. He is not limited by time, circumstances, or human conditions. He is life itself. Jesus looks at Martha and responds, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even if he were dead, will live." This sentence changes everything, because it is not a promise for the future. It is a declaration of identity for the present. He is saying, no matter what has died in you, if I am here, nothing is ever lost. Lazarus didn't need time. I didn't need treatment. I didn't need help. He needed Jesus. And maybe you feel like Lazarus today, buried by your failures, forgotten by people, surrounded by memories that bind you like death belts. They've already tried to convince you that you're hopeless, that your faith has died, that your hope has expired, that your chance has passed. But what if I told you that none of this intimidates Jesus, that he walks exactly towards what everyone has abandoned? That he cries in the face of your pain, not because he is powerless, but because he loves you with eternal depth? He wept for Lazarus, but he did not remain in tears. He got up, he went to the tomb, and in front of everyone who had already given up, he shouted in a firm voice, "Lazaro, come out!" This was not a suggestion. It was a summons, a divine order to what already seemed finished. And at the same moment, Lazarus was resurrected. He left, still wrapped in bandages, still with the smell of death. But he left. Because when Jesus calls, death obeys. The shame is silent. The guilt recedes. Fear flees. And even the impossible bends. Can you understand this? Maybe you don't need another chance. Maybe you need resurrection. Something that breaks the logic of your pain. Break the sentence of emotional bankruptcy that you yourself decreed. Jesus reveals it to you today. There is a voice calling you. She's not asking if you're strong enough to try again. She's saying, come out, come back to life. Come back to faith. Come back to the mission, because even if everything has died, if he is present, everything can come back to life. Now listen carefully. If this message found something dead inside you, comment now. Jesus, call me out. It's not just a sentence. It's a cry. It's an answer. It's a cry from your soul, saying, I no longer accept living buried. And if you feel like this was more than a video, more than content, but a living word from heaven to your spirit, share this with someone who is also stuck in the tomb of fear, failure, or guilt. Do not withhold what can resurrect another soul, because this is the end. But it is also the beginning. The end of fear, of shame, from paralysis, and the beginning of a new season. Because Jesus reveals to you that the fear of failing again only has power over those who have forgotten that they serve a God who resurrects. And today, he calls you back to life,